My name is Brian, and I had an experience a couple years ago that I can explain. But I don't think that most people will accept my explanation of what occurred. I know what I saw, and I know that what I saw would have been the end of me had I not acted the way that I did. I also know that I'm never ever traveling in that particular part of Northern America ever again. This was back in 2022, and I was on a trip to the Cascades for both work and leisure. I'm a nature photographer by trade, and an avid hiker, and nature lover as well, so trips into some of the areas where I shoot tend to be pretty amazing. I've been all over the Pacific Northwest, and most of the Southwest as well, and I know my way around a forested wilderness. This particular trip was all about alpine lakes, which dot the entirety of the mountain range. I love those subject shoots, because no matter how many times I get to gaze out over one of those beautiful, turquoise, natural mirrors, it never ever gets old. It's literally one of the most beautiful scenes on the face of the planet, especially this particular lake I was at, which was nestled in the shadow of a volcanic peak. The trail I was hiking was not a public one, or rather it was not well known to the public, and it was off the beaten path. Basically, it led from a pretty well-known campground, which is where I had my Jeep parked, and it scales a high ridge before descending into the valley where the lake is. The top of this ridge is an amazing spot to get really good shots of the lake, the peak, and just the whole area, but it's hard to get to if you're novice at hiking. Landscapes are my bread and butter. You see, it takes too much patience to hunt down a mountain goat or an elk and remain totally still so that you could get the shot. So if I'm shooting a gallery for a client, it's usually landscapes. And that said, I do love shooting fauna when I spot it, and this ridge was also an amazing spot to catch some stunning wildlife. In that part of the Cascades, I've seen ospreys, lynx, dozens of elk, and even a bald eagle once, and I got at least one shot of every one of them. I had parked my Jeep and I was making my way up to the ridgeline when I noticed another hiker moving quickly in the opposite direction. He seemed to be in a rush, so I stepped off the trail to get out of his way. I said hello as he passed, but he just nodded and blasted right past me without so much as a word. I could tell he wasn't being deliberately rude, but it was almost like he just refused to speak, like he was afraid to do so. This didn't occur to me until much later in my trip though, and at the time, I thought he'd just lost track of time and was running late. I watched him go for a moment, and then I just kept going on my own hike, because I frankly had shit to get done. The hike up the ridge was a bear every single time, but I loved it. I'm not super into the fitness of it, if I'm honest, but I love knowing that at the top of the ridge was this flat stone I could sit on, and a beautiful vista to look out at as I sipped espresso from a thermos I bring with me every time. My ass hitting that rock when I get to the top is one of the best sensations in life. Or I guess it was. Damn. Anyway, so I'm pressing onward, I'm pumping my legs with some intensity, when I hear this odd noise. The reason I say that is because it wasn't just unusual or out of place. You see, the noise itself was just bizarre. It sounded like the bellows pump on a blacksmith forge breathing in and out, and it had no earthly business being heard by me where I was at. I paused and I looked in every direction, but I didn't see a damn thing. The sound had seemed to come from everywhere, but I kept getting the impression that it had gone behind me. I spent a little time scrutinizing the trail behind me, but again, there was nothing. I shook it off and I kept going, genuinely wondering if I had maybe been hallucinating, which was worrisome, but I shook that off too. Finally, I'd made it to the top of the ridge, and I found my little spot with the flat boulder. I took a bunch of shots of the area, really quick, and then sat down and opened up my thermos as I gazed across the valley, over at the lake and the peak beyond. It was glorious, and so was the cafe latte with the extra shot I'd made for myself back at the house. I sat there for a good hour, just taking it all in and enjoying the simple pleasure of coffee and a nice view. After a nice long rest and a fair portion of the coffee in my thermos, I decided it was time to get a move on. The descent to the lake was going to be a lot less arduous than the climb up the ridge had been, but I was burning daylight, and I had quite a few shots to get yet. My plan was to spend the morning at the lake getting shots of it, and the peak, have a packed lunch at the shoreline, and head back to my Jeep in the PM before it got dark. As I started down off the incline towards the lake, I heard that odd bellows sound again, but this time it distinctly came from my right. When I looked in that direction, though, all I saw were some high-up tree branches rustling in the cool breeze. I stared that way for a moment, expecting to see an animal or something, but nothing appeared, and the sound didn't repeat itself. Now, I'll admit, at the time, it absolutely unnerved the hell out of me, but there was just no evidence of anything having made the noise, and so I just kept going. I did ponder it as I continued down to the lake, and wondered if someone was messing around with a drone or something. It wouldn't be the first time I'd gotten the hell scared out of me by one. I actually had one of my own, which I had brought with me, but I wasn't proficient in its use, and so I rarely messed with it. About halfway down the ridge, I suddenly realized that I was thirsty as hell when I stopped to take a breather near an old, thick oak tree. That's what I get for drinking all that coffee, I guess. I stopped and pulled out one of the 2 water bottles I had brought with me and took a huge draw. As I was standing there just sipping on my water, I heard another sound, very different from the first though. It was the loud, piercing call of a predatory bird, an eagle as a dove for prey, but it was loud as hell, so loud that I had to cover my ears protectively and drop my water bottle. I'd never heard an animal call like that in my entire life. It was so loud that I instinctively crouched to make myself smaller. I remember feeling very aware of my body and how it reacted to the sound in that moment. I was trembling, but I realized that once I'd crouched down, I couldn't actually move. It was like I'd been stunned or something. I thought of a deer caught in headlights and spent the next few moments in a complete state of panic, fully expecting the proverbial Mack truck to take me out, but it never came. When the sound had passed and I took my hands away from my ears, I looked around wildly, fully expecting a bald eagle to take off into the trees with a raccoon or something, but there was nothing there. Just a clear, gorgeously blue sky above beautiful green trees. And I wondered if whatever had been was just sitting in a tree, really close to me, but maybe out of sight or camouflaged somehow. I couldn't move from that spot for a few moments. I'd like to say that it was just nerves, but I really tried to move and my body wouldn't respond right away. It was honestly pretty damn scary, because I thought I was literally having a heart attack. Then as quickly as it had came upon me, the feeling abated, and I was able to move again. I actually felt fine, which felt really weird, because it didn't feel like I should just snap back. I tried to shake all of it off, but the experience and the feeling were overwhelming. I moved down the trail really slowly at first, just trying to reorient myself to what the hell I was doing. And once I'd gotten my feet underneath me, I picked up the pace and tried to hoof it to the lakeshore as fast as my feet would carry me. This wasn't the smartest of ideas, because I was already disoriented, but everything in me needed to get as far away from whatever made that sound as I could. I burst from the tree line, covered in sweat, and almost dove straight into the water. I was so happy to see the lake. The natural majesty of it, coupled with the blast of crisp autumn air that came off the water, kind of knocked me back into reality. I remembered the purpose of my visit here, and not just that I needed to get to the lake. I stood and stared out over the gently lapping waters, and I started to calm down, even though I was emotionally overwhelmed in the opposite way this time. I started to tear up and blubber a bit, and it really bothered me, because while I'm often just stricken by natural beauty, this was way more than I usually felt. It was like nature or my subconscious was trying to counterbalance what had happened. Going from one extreme to another like that made me feel like I wasn't at all in control of my faculties, which isn't something I'm used to. And then I literally shook it off at that point as I felt a shiver come on. I decided to focus on work and why I was there, to take my mind off of all of it. I got out my camera and I took a bunch of pictures of the peak and the lake and pretty much everything that was around me. I tried as hard as I could to take my mind off whatever had occurred back in the woods and my current emotional state. I just focused on the next shot, and then the next one, and then the next one, and before I knew it, I'd gotten more than half the shots that I needed for this brief. I began to work on the next half when I realized again that I was really thirsty, even more so than before. I cursed when I realized that I'd not picked up my water bottle after dropping it before. I wasn't just upset that I might have lost it, or that I now had limited water. I just really hate littering. I know that sounds stupid, but the idea that I left trash in the Cascades bothered me intensely. I found a good spot to sit down, and I pulled out the second of my water bottles to take a drink. I drank about half the bottle and forced myself to stop, because while I had water at my Jeep, I knew I'd need the other half to get back up to the damn ridge. I put it away and got to my feet to get a head start on the other half of the shots I needed. I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to stop for lunch either. At least not at the lake. I was going to get my shots, get my ass up that ridge, and then scarf a sandwich on the flat rock with some coffee before leaving. I took a bunch of shots on the tree line surrounding the lake, and a panoramic shot of most of the lake's shoreline. As I stood at the shore and gazed out over the pristine reflective surface of the water, I saw two impossible things at once. The first, and the one I was first aware of, was a massive shadow that passed over my head. And the second was the reflection of whatever it was in the water. At first, I just thought it might have been a turkey vulture or maybe that eagle from earlier, and whatever it was just low and close to me, which didn't make me feel great or even safe. But the reflection in the water was of something huge and colored bright blue. It was so blue, in fact, that it almost blended with the clear blue sky above me. I turned around, expecting to see a hand glider flying low, which would have made a great shot, but was also nerve-wracking because if someone had gone that low, they were likely going to crash. A shock of blue-colored wing slipping over the treetops behind me was all I saw, and I winced, expecting to hear a crash and some shouting, but it never came. I stood there for at least a full minute, waiting for any sign of a crash, or perhaps the glider, or maybe a parasailer to bank back towards the lake. But instead, what came soaring over those trees was no contraption made by man, but the bright blue plumage and feathered countenance of the biggest bird I had ever seen in my entire life. The creature had a wingspan of at least 12 feet across, and his blue feathers were all but camouflage against the beautiful clear skies. It was hard to see even while looking right at it, which made me realize that if I wasn't looking right at it, it would be all but invisible. Its beak was yellow-white and looked like a wisp of cloud being kissed by a ray of sunlight. Its talons were tucked underneath it and were as blue as its feathers, except for the nails, which were a shock of black amidst all of that bright color. This creature, whatever it was easily the most beautiful and terrifying thing I'd ever seen in my life, and I stood in awe before it for longer than I should have. I realized in shock as its call pierced the calm of that alpine lake that it was diving straight towards me. I panicked and I dove towards a nearby tree standing on a jetty near the lake, and I scrambled underneath it. The creature's screech shattered the peace of that place and once again shook my entire body and soul. The giant bird flew over the tree and out over the lake toward the other shoreline, but it was turning swiftly. All I could do was lay there under the tree though, because once again, my body wouldn't let me react to what was happening. I felt paralyzed as I laid there, flailing impotently for the trunk of the tree to try and pull myself closer to it. So many things were clicking into place at once as I laid there helpless. I realized now what had made all those strange sounds I'd heard before. The bellows were its massive wings flapping, likely right over my damned head. The screech was now obviously from this giant, terrible bird, but I also realized that what I'd experienced before and what I was experiencing now was an infrasonic stun, the same that is generated by a tiger's or a lion's roar. It paralyzes prey and causes feeling of fear, anxiety, and panic in most animals, including human beings. That fact that I was half paralyzed was almost more terrifying than the implications of being hunted by a giant eagle, which is also what the damn thing looked like. It screeched again as it passed over my tree, but this time, most of the sound went ahead of me, and I didn't get the full effect. I was able to turn just enough to watch the thing fly over the trees again, and I forced myself to roll over to the tree and used it to steady myself. I tried to conjure my will and focus on getting my body out of this stunned state. Once I'd realized what was happening to me, and that it was more likely just a physiological effect, it was easier for me to push it aside. I pushed through the nerves, the fear, and a little bit of pain, and I managed to get to my feet. Now I had to get out of there, and I knew that there was at least some safety within the trees, so I just bolted for the tree line, snatching up my bag where I dropped it when I dived for the tree. No shadows or horrid sounds followed, and once I was under the canopy, I felt a little less exposed. But I only kind of had an idea of what I was going to do next, because I wasn't near the trail, and I wasn't sure how to get to it, or if I even wanted to at that point. You see, the trail was exposed to the sky in a lot of places, and I wasn't sure that was the best course to take. It was at this moment that I realized exactly why the hiker I'd seen earlier looked so damn shook when he moved past me. He'd seen the damn thing too. And I tell you, I was so angry at him in that moment for not warning me, but, I also realized that he likely wouldn't have even known what to tell me. I sure as hell wouldn't have known how to describe the thing right after it almost killed me. Not to mention, I'd not have believed him, and I wouldn't expect anyone to believe me. The way I saw it, I had two problems. The first was obvious and simple. I needed to get the living hell out of there, and damn fast. And the second was ephemeral and complicated. I was a nature photographer, and I just discovered a completely new species of animal, utterly unheard of in zoological circles. I had to get a shot of the thing if I could. And so I slowly crept out of the tree line, camera at the ready, my head on a swivel, looking up at that perfect blue sky which would now never look so calming again. I moved to about 5 feet from the trees, but I didn't dare go any further, and I waited. But nothing happened for quite a while. Every fiber of my being told me to leave, but I had overcome the creature's cries, and I could overcome my own instinct. Instead of fleeing, I began to make loud whooping calls and stomping around, trying to draw the thing's attention. I made a few screeches of my own as well, trying to imitate the sound the beast made. I stood there, grunting, shouting, and cawing at nothing for a solid 10 minutes, but I didn't see or hear the creature again. After about a half hour of this nonsense, I'd realized that either I'd imagined it entirely, or that it just wasn't coming. And so, with a heavy heart, I turned back into the woods and began the climb to the top of the ridge. It took me a lot longer to get up the trail than it had to come up the other side, but I was constantly stopping to look above me for a glimpse of the great bird. I realized about halfway through the journey, though, that I was only half afraid of the damn thing, and part of me was actually hoping to see it. So I got to this spot where I dropped my water bottle, and I scoured the ground for a moment to find it. When I did, I immediately unstopped it and downed the rest of its contents in one big gulp, finally coming close to satiating my thirst. I closed my eyes as I guzzled the water, and just enjoyed rehydrating myself. I'd only had my eyes closed for an instant when I heard the familiar and horrifying whoosh from above. I jerked, spitting out some of my water, and I spun around to see the giant blue avian gliding above the treetops over my head, its bright blue pinions just the light outline against the gorgeous sky. I realized then that half of the reason I hadn't spotted it before was that it never occurred to me to look up. Even when I thought I was in danger, I had instinctively looked at my perimeter and behind me, but never above me. I was looking up then, though, and I saw as I watched the creatures circle overhead, and I would always look up from that point on when I reacted to danger. I ducked behind the oak that I leaned on earlier, and I shoved my water bottle back into my bag. Once my pack was secured, I leaned out, camera in hand, to try to get a shot of the bird. But it was faster than I expected, and hard to get into focus with its bizarre camouflage. It was all I could do to continue to track the thing's movements as it soared. Finally, as it once again circled back towards the patch clearing I was in, I got a good clear shot of the thing, and even as I took the shot, I knew it was going to be difficult to prove to anyone what it was. Just as I was lining up for a second shot to get a better angle at the creature's frontal features, I realized that it was angling downward. The screech of the beast tore through the canopied forest and shook the bones in my body once again. This time, it made me lose the grip on my camera. It fell from my hands as I fell to my knees and tumbled through the grass before disappearing into the brush. I rolled to the side, behind the tree, and heard another Smithy's bellows as the giant blue bird pulled up at the last second, narrowly missing me. I sat with my back to the tree, away from the clearing, hiding from this horrendous new predator of a man that I had discovered. As my back pressed against the trunk of that oak, I could hear the thing crying and flapping its wings above me. and it was a bizarre cacophony of sound. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that my camera was lost to me. I would not dare set foot in that clearing or this valley again if I ever escaped this place. When the sounds of the creature began to dissipate into the west toward the volcanic peak, I got my feet underneath me, and I ran for all I was worth. I ran straight up that ridge, ignoring pain and thirst the whole way. I ran past my flat rock, and I remember actively crying as I passed it, because I knew that I'd never enjoy that simple pleasure again. I ran straight down the rest of the trail, past where I'd spotted the other hiker from before, and now was so much more understanding of his odd behavior. I ran non-stop all the way back to my Jeep, which I climbed inside of as quickly as I could, and I cried my eyes out, just trying to find some kind of release to the whole ordeal. As I said at the beginning of the story, I knew in my heart that I would never return to this particular part of North America, and it was a sad feeling. I also knew that my camera was lost to me now. I might hire someone to go out and get it, but I wasn't ever going to find it again. My life has utterly changed by this misadventure, and not just because I was suddenly made keenly aware of what it was like to be the mouse that the owl caught. I've never and will never see birds the same way again. The other week, a turkey vulture flew over my Jeep while I was driving, and I had a damn panic attack, and I had to pull over. It's part of why I decided to write this out. I mean, I should feel somewhat lucky. I discovered and was now aware of a completely unknown creature, but I also have no proof of its existence with my camera lost. I've researched it since then, and I believe what I saw was the thunderbird of Native American legend. Can you imagine that? An actual mythological creature. And I saw it. I have a strong desire to see the thing one more time, which is outweighed heavily by my need to never ever hear its cry again. So yeah, if you're ever in the Cascades, or anywhere else in North America for that matter, keep your eyes on the skies, especially when the weather is perfect.